people are kinda stupid. You can give them goo and they will take goo. What does freedom of speech really mean? Is there something called as sedition? Regulation of social media and regulation of OTT platforms by the government. What is allowed to be said, what is allowed to be shown, what philosophy can be there, what philosophy cannot be there. So who gets to decide? Then we are just doomed. It's like the biggest forgery, the biggest fraud, the biggest corruption, the biggest scandal of all times. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Truth Shots with Kapil. Today I'm going to talk about something different. Something different more in the sense of most of the times when I will do these truth shots, I will at least know my point of view on the subject that I am discussing. Today I'm torn, I'm split. I don't know the right answer. So today I'm going to go through an elaborate analysis of the topic that India has been discussing since the last few days. And that topic is regulation of social media and regulation of OTT platforms by the government. Now, there are four critical aspects that I see to the entire debate. And I will talk about the four aspects. As I said earlier, I don't know the answer. I'm still torn. I guess in the next couple of weeks, I will probably have a more definitive answer on which side am I leaning and how do I think those controls need to be put in. While I say that, I must also mention that a couple of weeks back, when I did the truth shots around Koo app, I did talk about the need for regulating social media and the need for government to come up with some kind of guidelines. So with that, let me get into that in more detail. The first aspect that we need to look at is what do we think is the maturity level of the consumers on social media or OTT platforms? Do we think that people have the power to take the decision on their own on what content do they want to consume or they don't want to consume? Or to take the decision on when they go through and when they read a variety of different parts of a news or some kind of a story, do they have enough or do we think they are mature enough to actually understand the ramifications and take a judgment of their own? Or is it that we think people are born stupids and they need to be herded, they need to be led into a certain direction, and in that sense, just like you would herd a sheep, you can herd them into thinking a certain way, into deciding a certain way, and into following a certain path. Well, for me, on this part, I'm very clear. People are kinda stupid. You can give them goo and they will take goo. So in that sense, I have always believed that people need to be provided information that they have the maturity level to consume, and a lot of people may not. That's the first part of the decision making on this. The second part is this real debate around freedom of speech. What does freedom of speech really mean? And over there also, I'm still a little bit torn. While I like the idea of freedom of speech, while I like the fact that everybody should be able to express their own opinion, I guess, is that right? Is that really how it should be? If I say something and if I dress up in a certain fashion, or if I do something and somebody else gets offended by it, do I have any liability towards it? A little bit, right? Maybe not completely. Maybe I shouldn't have to just do something because others want me to. But to the extent that it is the normal, acceptable social behavior, I do, I should, I would, right? I mean, I'm still torn on this. I mean, I'm somebody that comes to office every day dressed in chappals and shorts and t-shirt, and a lot of people I know have a problem with the way I dress, with the way I talk, with the kind of gali I would do, and I choose to pretty much ignore it. However, a lot of times I am going to a meeting and I would choose to wear a shirt. Sometimes, rarely though, I would even choose to wear a coat. So I'm still split on this entire debate around freedom of speech, freedom of expression, what should be allowed, what should not be allowed. The third part of this critical debate is really around governments. Is there something called as sedition? And if it is, what does sedition really constitute? In my view, in a lot of countries, in a lot of societies, sedition right now is being defined as following the view of the ruling government. If you don't follow it, you are committing sedition. That's true for sure in India. That is very much true in the US now as well. If you have a liberal standpoint, you can go and fucking do the entire Black Lives Matter, destroy shops, do all the violence and nobody says something. But God forbid, if you are a Trump supporter, you enter the Capitol, it's violence, it's sedition. It's not just sedition. It's like the biggest forgery, the biggest fraud, the biggest corruption, the biggest scandal of all times. Anyway, and in that sense, I have the real problem in terms of what the government is doing in terms of putting the controls in. The fourth part of this is actually looking at the entire global environment around this. All of these debates about the controls, about the freedom of speech, about the government, everything is being put in the context of a specific country. Because when we talk about rule of the land, we are actually talking about rule of the country. We don't really live in a country-based environment anymore. We live in a global world. We live in a world where it is not difficult for me to access the thoughts of anybody, whether they are from Russia or North Korea or China or Iran or US or any other country for that matter. So in that sense, what does it really mean following the rule of the land? There is another concept that I want to bring to this, and I had talked about this in my last couple of weeks back when I did the session around QApp as well. Okay, let's assume for a minute there is a need to regulate social media. There is a need to regulate the content that is being shown on OTT. There is a need to, put together some kind of a structure. My question really is, who gets to decide? What are the beliefs of the people that are coming up with this decision? What is their certain, whether they are liberals, whether they are conservatives, whether they are religious, whether they are irreligious, everything that somebody would come up with to say whether this is acceptable or not acceptable is really dependent on their behavior. For example, for me personally, anything political is allowed, anything religious is allowed, anything social is allowed. If you put me as a regulator, I will probably go to a certain extreme. Somebody else may have a certain set of beliefs and they will follow it that way. So who gets to decide? If it is the ruling government that is going to take the decision on what is allowed to be said, what is allowed to be shown, what philosophy can be there, what philosophy cannot be there, then we are just doomed. Then we are essentially saying that we don't live in a democracy anymore. We live in a society wherein the majority government, which has been selected, and that majority changes over a period of time, as we have always seen. The majority government is the decider of what do people get to see, what do they get to consume, and what is allowed to be said. This one critical aspect of what is the regulatory mechanism for it is extremely critical. It is extremely important. What really is happening right now is perhaps what the airlines industry perhaps went through, I wouldn't say a century, but maybe, more like 70 years back, 80 years back, wherein the question was, should airlines be private or should airlines be nationalized? It is perhaps the same decision that Indian banks went through when Indira Gandhi nationalized them. Should banks be private? Should banks be government based? And I think this is where we are getting into a huge debate with social media. So it's not just a question of putting regulatory mechanisms in place. I think where we are headed, if we go with the rate and pace and if we go with the approach that we are following right now, I think where we are headed right now is in a means where the government is going to own social media, where the government is going to own what is being said and what is being listened to. It may not be that the government owns the entire internet or the entire set of content consumption that people have, but the government is going to take a huge stake in it. They will have their own networks, just like there is DD1 or just like, there is the Doordarshan or the All India Radio in India. Or, if we go to US, it's not government owned, but, there is the CNN which follows a certain government. There is the Fox News that follows a different government. So we will continue to see government having a much larger stake. There is one last aspect that I should mention here before completing this, which kind of puts the story together in full detail. And that is what is happening in Australia right now. There is a very reasonable question that everybody is asking, which is, well, Facebook, you don't really own the content that goes on your network, which is, what kind of takes away any kind of liability from you. But then if that is the case, why are you responsible for taking away so much of revenue from the news people who actually spend a lot of money into coming up with the news? And that is where Australia has come up with their own, call it censorship, wherein they are saying if Facebook is to promote or if Facebook is to put some news on its network on facebook.com, then they gotta pay the news networks and compensate them for it. And this really is what is making this entire equation very interesting right now. I for myself can't decide on which side am I leaning on. I'm still more on the side of freedom of speech. I'm still more on the side of giving people a freedom of expression. However, I do think that people are kind of stupid. They don't have the maturity level, or at least to say differently, they don't spend enough time to listening to a news, to listening to an item from or to listening to a story from all different critical viewpoints and then take a call. They listen to the standpoint, the viewpoint that is most prevalently available to them. That viewpoint, more often than not, comes from the people that they associate with. And guess who do they associate with? The ones whose viewpoint is familiar to those. So there is a circle, and in that circle, you have a certain viewpoint, you get stories of that viewpoint, and your viewpoint becomes stronger. In that sense, yeah, I do agree that people are kind of stupid. Should such controls be put in, everywhere by the government? Absolutely no. Should there be somebody that should have that kind of a approach where they are responsible for it? I think yes. However, more needs to be done to determine what is this regulatory mechanism, what is this body, and who gets to decide. I'm sure there are a lot of questions around this. I'm open to doing more debate around this. I'm open to kind of discussing this across various social media channels, or if somebody wants to call me, phone me, WhatsApp me, or want to have a personal one-on-one debate around this. I am actually looking at refining my thought more on this. So I welcome your feedback. With that, we come to the end of this Truth Shots with Kapil. Have a nice day. Stay in touch and keep watching Truth Shots with Kapil. Thank you so much.